Over the next 200 years, Malleus Maleficarum becomes a bestseller, going to press in 4 different languages. It is destined to become a major inspiration for the secular, Catholic, and Protestant witch hunters who will terrorize Europe and North America during the 17th and 18th century. Of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, the 2 most powerful kingdoms on the Spanish peninsula, unite. Her Dominican advisors quickly convince Isabella, a devout Catholic, that the problem of secret Judaizing is a mortal threat to the unity of the Spanish nation, and that an inquisition may be the only solution.
If clergy are demanding an inquisition, it is not simply because they are fanatical, but because they know very well that behind them there are many supporters, many of their faithful, who are also conscious of a problem as they perceive it.
King Ferdinand, a wily political schemer, sees that an alliance with the Roman Catholic Church can profit Spain in many ways.
There was probably another agenda on Ferdinand's mind, and that was how could he get his hands on the wealth of these converts. There was a huge amount of money that was waiting locked up in the coffers of wealthy convert merchants and nobility, and Ferdinand set out to get his hands on that, and he did.
King Ferdinand's first step is to contact the Pope and express his concern over Spain's Jewish problem.
Great harm is suffered by the Christians from the contact, intercourse, and communications which they have with the Jews, who always attempt in various ways to seduce faithful Christians from the Holy Catholic faith. King Ferdinand.
Under pressure from Spain's persistent king, Pope Sixtus IV issues a papal bull calling for an inquisition to stamp out heretical depravity in Spain, aimed at Jewish conversos. This new Spanish Inquisition is worlds apart from all inquisitorial tribunals that have come before. Its rules ensure that King Ferdinand, and not the Pope, controls every aspect of its activities. The Supreme Court of the Inquisition, called the Suprema, contains 6 or 7 men personally appointed by the king. Only one member, the Inquisitor General, receives official appointment by the Pope, but even he has to be nominated by Ferdinand first.
Although you and the others enjoy the title Inquisitor, it is I and the Queen who have appointed you, and without our support, you can do very little. King Ferdinand.
Potere statale acquisisce.
That means that the power of the state starts to have, in the Spanish Inquisition, a certain right of control on the institution. That didn't exist in the Middle Ages.
On February 6, 1481, the first auto de fe ceremony, translation Act of Faith, commences in Seville. At this event, which will become the trademark of the Spanish Inquisition, over 100 converso men and women accused of secretly practicing the Jewish faith are judged before the church and state. 6 pay the ultimate price by being burned at the stake.
At the heart of the auto was always a sermon. And the Dominicans would select their finest orator, the one with the strongest voice. And sometimes these sermons would go on for half an hour, 2 hours. The participants are stripped of all their dignity. Their heads are shaved. That includes women as well as men. Men's beards are taken off, and in the case of Spain, a man's virility resided in his beard, so it was a very unpleasant thing to do to him. The idea behind the ceremony was, at all times, to humiliate the penitents and to show the congregation what the penalty was for engaging in heresy.
Even people who didn't have much education and weren't interested in theological niceties and weren't even sure of the creeds that they repeated or the prayers that they said, they knew what was going on at a properly staged auto de fe.
It was a terrifying spectacle meant to set limits in people's minds about what they could say, what they could think, what they could believe.
Within a year of its establishment, 1,500 conversos accused of Judaizing have been brought to trial, and hundreds more are condemned to death.
The number of people who were burned to death at one time was, even by present-day standards, staggering. You'd have 28 people burnt at one time. You'd have 70 people burnt at one time. And in the largest auto that was ever held, 109 people were put on the stake at once.
Unlike most medieval heretics who dared to preach their ideas in public, secret Judaizing was by definition a clandestine activity taking place behind closed doors.
And neighbors could then, if they saw someone looking at a small book, which could be the Book of Hours, they could say, I saw this individual reading a book and I believe it's a Jewish book. I heard somebody mumbling a prayer. I'm sure it's a Jewish prayer.
So lighting candles, bathing, washing clothing, butchering meat, preparing meat for the table, eating meat on a day of fish, such as a Friday or a Wednesday, could land you in big trouble if your neighbors happened to notice and if they had a grudge against you.
Accusations bring on more accusations. Some conversos actually come forward to denounce themselves, hoping to clear their record by beating their enemies to the punch. But a light penance can only be earned with a full confession, and that means naming names of fellow heretics.
The only way you could get out of it was to pick names of others in the community. This is, of course, so reminiscent in our own country of the 1950s and the Great Red Scare involving the House Un-American Activities Committee. And this is where so many tragedies happen. People who were innocent of anything, this convert might, under torture or threat of death, give out names of just about anybody just to escape.
If Ferdinand and Isabella receive credit as the architects of the Spanish Inquisition, their building contractor must certainly be Tomás Torquemada, the first Inquisitor General.
From the 1490s onwards, he very carefully drew up systematically rules which we still have in print to guide the inquisitors down to the smallest detail as to what they could or could not do, what they should or should not do. And as a result of this, he can rightly be considered the founder of the Inquisition.
There is no question that Torquemada presides over the Inquisition during its bloodiest period and clearly exerts plenty of influence over the crown. Although he's been portrayed as everything from a Svengali-like madman to a sinister, sex-crazed monk, historians know very little about the man.
You know, he was typical of the theologians who were very fanatical and very anti-Jewish, extremely hostile to the conversos. And he's a man who I think epitomized that kind of intolerance and ferocity and that was so characteristic of those early inquisitors.
Conservative estimates indicate that during Torquemada's 20-year tenure as Inquisitor General, 2,000 people lose their lives and thousands more are punished. Within 5 years of its birth, the Spanish Inquisition is in full swing and earning its fearsome reputation. The Spanish conversos, Jews who have converted to Catholicism, have nowhere to turn for justice. Both church and secular authorities follow the same pretzel logic. All conversos who flee from the Inquisition are, by implication, guilty. All who come forward to denounce themselves are, by their own admission, guilty. And those who are tried and condemned are, of course, guilty. The inner workings of the Inquisition's court are kept private and its records carefully guarded even from the crown. When the Spanish Inquisition arrests someone, that person simply disappears into prison until the Inquisition finishes with him or her. Family and friends left to wait and worry are powerless to help.
The Spaniards made a true fetish of this, el secreto. I mean, this is one of their fundamental principles, that the prestige of the institution was felt to depend in fair measure on keeping secrecy intact.
For the accused, the surreal, almost arbitrary nature of the process compounds the terror. There is no trial, rather a series of audiences after which the prisoner returns to his cell. During this ordeal, which can go on for weeks or months, the accused may never learn the crimes of which he is accused. He is constantly urged, sometimes under threat of torture, to confess.
And so the accused person would have to make their own excuses without knowing the nature of the denunciations directed against them.
Urged on by Inquisitor General Torquemada, in March of 1492, King Ferdinand issues another edict of expulsion. Jews are given 4 months to accept baptism or leave Spain. In the months that follow, nearly half Spain's Jewish population, an estimated 40,000 people, take flight. The rest remain and convert to Christianity.
And they just fall into the trap which had been set for their fellow Jews a century before. So the Jews gain nothing by converting. The social situation does not change at all. If anything, it gets worse for people of Jewish origin.
Do not grieve over your departure, for you have to drink down your death in one gulp, whereas we have to stay behind among these wicked people, receiving death from them every day. Juan de Leon, Spanish Jewish converso.
The Spanish Inquisition imprisons innocent citizens, confiscates property, destroys families, and puts thousands of people to death. What it did little of, according to historians, is the thing for which it has become so famous: torture.
One of the things that has been firmly established by the New Inquisition scholarship is precisely that torture was used very, very sparingly by the Inquisition.
Torture is used to elicit a confession, purely and simply. And once the confession is there, the torture stops.
No matter how infrequent, the Spanish have precise rules for their torture. Prisoners, male and female, remain naked throughout the session with only a small cloth to cover their private parts.
Now, not all the clergy of the day were celibate, and not all of those who were celibate could be able to look on a scene like this over and over again and feel no twinge of sadism, no twinge of sexual satisfaction. To say that this could go on century after century is to completely misunderstand the nature of human sexuality.
The garrucha, the Spanish version of the medieval strapado, becomes the most common torture.